Hi, back with you again to talk a little bit more about Deck System. And what I want to cover in this session is how we establish the ribbon, the menu system that exists in the ribbon. And that is a process that is now unique to Word 2007. The earlier version of the Word made it much easier for low-level developers like myself to arrange macros in some kind of a menu system. They made it real easy to do it. But once they came out with Word 2007, they came up with this ribbon, and the ribbon took me a while to figure out how to manipulate the ribbon. And actually, there was it basically required the development by Microsoft of a piece of software that enabled me to easily, or somewhat easily, figure out how to do it. That piece of software is called the Custom UI Editor, and much of this lesson is going to be showing you how the Custom UI Editor works. What I would recommend that you do right now in order to follow along in this lesson is to go to the internet and download, just do a Google for Custom UI Editor, just like I have it written here, and download that piece of software onto your computer. Now, if you're using the work laptop, you're going to have to probably get an administrator, almost certainly get an administrator, in order to install your downloaded software. So you probably want to take it and log in as an administrator, or have the administrator log in and download and install the software, and then re-log in as yourself. If you aren't able to do that, you can simply load the same thing onto your own computer at home. Do a Google, download the same thing, and you'll be able to follow along with this lesson in exactly the same way. But what Word has done is it's combined XML programming. All the macros we've been doing are in what we call Visual Basic Programming, but they've used this XML type code, which is similar to the HTML code that's used for web pages, and they're using that to identify various parts of the document and write code for various parts of the document. And that was some kind of big, supposedly positive innovation. I don't know exactly how positive, but it was an innovation as part of Word 2007 and Office 2007 in general. But what basically is being done for our purposes is manipulating this menu system that we have under the ribbon here. And you notice that if we look at reg groups first, for example, up here, which I'm highlighting, it's a menu and then a sub-menu system, and then even a sub-menu system under that. For example, there's a reg groups menu followed by a CalWorks menu, then a claimant responsibility menu, and then when you finally get to what actually is you're going to order up, then these things are called buttons. So you got these, and the buttons are basically, all the buttons are a reference to a macro which is in the Visual Basic stuff that we've just been looking at. So the whole menu system is just to get to macros. Sometimes I'll have the button right on the menu. For example, orders is a straight button. So is contacts. So is reference. So is letter. But since there's a series of documents, reg groups is a menu and submenu system. Form decisions is a menu and submenu system. The bottom 5 here being, though, straight buttons, which then, like I say, translate into macros. I think you get the idea. The pararegs system here is also a drop-down menu system, and it's a little bit of a different type of thing, and I'll describe that as we look at the process that's used to create this menu system. So back to the custom UI editor. That is basically a text reader that automatically links up the Word document or the Word template, depending on what is being used, with the XML code, which is basically on a straight text file. And to explain a little bit about XML code, it uses tags, and the tags are what you'll notice when you see a tag, or what's referred to as tags, is they have these, what are they called? Arrows? Front arrows, back arrows? That's what it is it's the thing that's, I guess, above the period and above the comma on the keyboard. And when you're starting a process, and I just said name for lack of a better word, you put the process you're starting between these things, and when you're ending it, you do the same thing, except you put a slash before whatever it is. And now I want you to load up. In fact, I'm going to knock this off so you can do it. I'm assuming you've loaded the custom UI editor somewhere, and I'm going to run it. And what I get is a blank screen here, and it will remain blank until we open something. And what I'm going to do is open pats.m out of startup. So you may need to start with my computer to navigate over to pats.m. So we're going to load pats.m into our macro editor. And what you see is all this code, which is a different kind of code than the Visual Basic code we were looking at. And it does have these tags that I was describing. And basically you see, for example, at the very top of the document there's this ribbon tag. That means that what's in this code will be added to the ribbon. And if you go all the way to the bottom here, you will notice that there's a end to the ribbon process. And since everything in this whole set of code has to do with modifying the ribbon, that's why the ribbon tag and the ribbon end is at the very top and at the very bottom. The next thing is tabs. Well, tabs are the element of the ribbon that is right here. In other words, right now we're on the Home tab, but if I click this, it's on the Insert tab. If I click this, it's on the Page Layout tab, so forth and so on. What I ended up modifying was what was on the Home tab. And so it's kind of one thing that's kind of interesting. I'll just mention because Word does it, and I have no idea how they do it. But as you modify the ribbon to add your own things, like I've done here, it squishes what had been on the ribbon. If you take a look at a ribbon that doesn't, a Word Home tab ribbon that doesn't have our menu on it, you'll see that you have all the choices for styles and editing up there, and now it's all part of a menu system. That's just by way of observation. But anyway, it's nice that Word does that, allows you room to build your own menus. So I put them on the Home tab. So going back to the Custom UI Editor, you'll see it says Tabs, and I'm going to modify, and if we go to the very bottom, there should be an end. There's an end statement for tabs, see? And then we're going to say this tab is tab Home, okay? It's identifying it as tab Home, and that's the Home tab. And again, if you go to the very bottom, you'll see it ends the tab. Okay. So the first and the label of the tab is, I guess the label is Dex. Oh, the group. The group on the tab is, this is group 1, and that's going to refer to this whole group of commands, which is got a label Dex System. See at the bottom here? So the other groups are like font, paragraph, that's in Word. I could have added something to these things, but I just created my own group, and that group is Dex System. And so, again, looking at the group, it's been labeled Dex System. All right, the first item is Reg Groups, and that's a menu that's going to have submenus. So notice what happens. I start menu, and it's Reg Groups. Then I create a new tag without doing the end tag, without putting a slash menu, which would end the menu. I'm going to create a new menu, so that's going to create a submenu called CalWorks. And then I'm going to create a submenu under that called Claimant Responsibility. Finally, there's going to be 3 buttons under that menu, and those buttons contain ID, which is just a name that I've called it, a label, which is what the user sees, an image, which is which just tells it to put the text of the label there, I think, and align it. But the key is on action, because that's referring to a macro. In other words, that is a macro that's in our Visual Basic. So to run, if the user hits the cooperation denial button, let's go into PATS and Visual Basic, and all these macros are in ribbon control, which is a module, one of these modules, and they're ribbon control. Everything that's in the ribbon is here. And this particular button, cooperation denial, the action is my button co-op D. That's the name of the macro. So let me just copy that, go back to the Visual Basic Editor, and search for that macro, and sure enough, there it is. And what this macro does is it refers to the ID control of that button, which is NCOOP. That's the ID thing that's here. Don't ask me why, it just requires that. And then it's saying here's the macro, here's the subroutine, which has already been referred to. It's basically going to look for this ID, and if it's there, which it will be because that's the ID of it, then run pat3, which is under this, run this macro. So all this macro does is refer it refers to the ribbon and then directs the word to a different macro. So it's one macro leading to another macro. And so just to show further what happens here, if I go to pat3 and I search for this, here's the macro, and basically it's going to run actually I should explain, I said we changed the programming of reg groups. This happens to be a reg group. We changed the programming of reg groups for the better, so that if the parareg itself changes, the entire what's in the reg group would change along with it. We wouldn't have to separately change a reg group document. Prior to that, I just would have reg group open a document that had the series of regs that we wanted in the reg group. So basically, all it's doing is saying run a macro called reg group after we've identified that we want 015-1, and let's look for the macro that's called reg group, which is probably at the bottom. And reg group works pretty much like Alt V. Did I tell you that I didn't use mid? I did use mid. Look, it's here. I'm referring to last lesson. But anyway, reg group works much like Alt V does in finding the correct document to open up, and then searching for a $sign, which is the particular parareg involved, and then putting it in. And I'm going to let you, based on what I've already taught, let you try to look at that macro at your own leisure and identify it. But the whole reg group process is mainly what constitutes pat3 here in this module. So anyway, I've been talking about macros, and the main point of this is to talk about the menu system. The point being that basically the menu system and the macro system work together, but there's a different what do I want to say? Most of the macro system is all in Visual Basic, and the menu system's not in Visual Basic. So the menu system needs to basically identify what part of the Visual Basic system, what macro or subroutine, each of these macros are called subs really, start sub, end sub, which one needs to be run when the button is hit, the button at the end of the menu. So going back to this, we can see that there's a series of buttons, then it ends the menu. That's going to end the first menu. So the other menu is still going to be up, the superior menu, CalWorks menu, until that's cleared out. So that's the way these menus are built. Now, so the next menu under CalWorks, and so these are all the CalWorks ones until at some point, you see, I got this slash menu that ends the submenu, and then slash menu again that ends up that other next level of menus. Hope that made sense. If it doesn't, give me a call. I'll try to explain it further. Anyway, you can run all the way down here, and it's basically the same thing. These are how the menus were constructed. Basically, it's a process of having the ribbon. This is basically what we're looking at here basically constructs the ribbon, and then the idea is the ribbon is going to, when it gets to the button level, is going to refer to a macro. The only little bit of difference to that process is what I did for the pararegs, and I'll get to that in a second. For the pararegs, I did something a little bit different, both for the pararegs and the scroll. Instead of using ultimately buttons, which are what these are, and the menus that we described, like reg groups, will eventually get you to what is a button. This is just a different button. This is called a slightly different animal. It's called a drop down. And basically, when I click this, a macro is going to run from that. And rather than, notice it's not a button, it's just like a menu, but when you select the item in the menu, it's going to run. And that is called drop down. So if I go back to the UI editor and get to this part near almost at the very end of all the listings, where all of a sudden I'm doing the issue code button, the cover button, the letter button. I'm done with all the extensive menus for form decisions, computations, and that. And now just on the rest of the buttons that you see, you'll notice that instead of being a button, this is called a drop down. And on action, it is going to go to myDD macro, which is in the ribbon control module. So if we go back here to the ribbon control module and we find myDD macro, there it is, and it basically sets up a series. I haven't bothered to even talk to you about the syntax or the process of select case. It's not a programming process I use much, but since it was suggested for this, I just did it. And basically all it means is once it's selected, then this macro runs. So if under this myDD macro, which is called by the drop down here, that just sets up the drop down list, and that drop down list you see when you run the ribbon is not actually here in this UI code. It's back where the macros are in Visual Basic. So you see the list is what's the name of the list? The list is actually, it's a little more complicated because going back to the UI editor, unlike the buttons which just refer to one macro, there are 3 separate, maybe 4 separate macros that make this particular drop-down system work. And all these macros are in Visual Basic. It's get item count, get item label, get selected item index, and then the macro itself. And if we go back to Visual Basic, get item count, that's the number of, it's going to be the number of items that are there. So on our parareg index system, there's, starting with pararegs, which is the first item, and it does nothing if you select that. But there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 items. So if we go back to the first macro that it refers to, which is get item count, the count is 11. And then for the get item label, that's going to be a listing. This macro gives the listing of everything that goes in the label. So you can see pararegs, CalWorks index, food stamp index, Medi-Cal index, adult programs. That's the 11 items. I just had to add an obsolete index to that. And then the other macro that it refers to, and I just have to re-educate myself on this myself because I didn't modify that just ribbon get selected item index. Let me look for that. Okay, that's right here. Case is DD1 index equals 0. I guess that's just referring to the what it's been identified here as DD1. Yeah, the identification of that. So that was apparently some necessary code I had to write. None of you will have to worry about this, but you can see what a pain it was to try to figure all this out. But once done, it's done. And what will frequently happen to me is I'll learn a system like this, and the details of it I'll totally forget, and I'll have to relearn it when I'm doing something like this, which is trying to explain it. But I don't really have to explain it, because you can, in order to add something, all you would have to do is make sure, like I just did, is make sure that the count is changed to the number of items that were there, and that the label is information is consistent with the count and reflects the items that are there. So what I would basically, when we get to the end, what happens is the key macro, which is my DD macro, it basically says if the second item, case 1, is selected, then do pat1 get NFAFDC, which is, if we'll go and copy that so I can search for it. go to Pat1 here. And search for it. And that's going to set up that macro is going to call up the CalWorks index X, docx. And then that'll then set up rest of the macro system for inserting the parareg into the decision, which is what we sort of described how it works last lesson. So basically what I've described is how to use, or how this custom UI editor, and it really isn't this process, it's the document that it creates, works together with the macro system. And if we were to want to modify any of the ribbons or add buttons or add menus or anything, you just need to follow the format that's here in the basic things that I've just explained, and at the very end you simply go to File here and Save. I'm not going to save it because we haven't changed anything, but basically that's all you have to do is save it, and then the next time you open pats.m, the ribbon will have changed in the way you've changed it. Now, you'll say that's fine for the items that are on this ribbon here. You might notice that I've added a couple of buttons here that we're using these in Escondido now. Probably going to go statewide with them. They're ways of suggesting pararegs and adding the digest. But anyway, suppose we want to add buttons, or excuse me, there are buttons we also are using on the ribbon for the parareg system, like when the index comes up, and those buttons I believe are in some of the systems that are in the forms where all the other dials are, which is in the forms directory. So if I bring up custom editor, go File, Open, and instead of going to Startup, I go to C, WP51, Templates, Forms. Those are the three there. Regfill is what is the basis for all those indexes. So let me open that. Lots shorter document, but it also is involved with modifying the ribbon, as you see, ribbon, tabs, and the home tab, which is the one we're working on. And basically you can see it's the same process. I've set these buttons up. The buttons then refer to macros that are in Visual Basic. Okay? And the three other files that have that are also in, they're the .m files. There's three of them that are in Forms. So if those are to be modified in any way, which they probably won't be, that's how you get to them. Again, you need to use the custom UI editor. There's actually a way you can do it without using the custom UI editor. I've never done it. It scared me when I looked at it before they developed the custom UI editor, so I never did it. And so, but if you wanted to find out how to do it, you can. You got to somehow zip together the Word file and the and the text file that you've created with all this ribbon information. But anyway, the custom UI editor makes that very nice to create as well as edit in a way I just showed you. Now, actually, just a word about the paraphrased regulations. When Barry or whoever is doing the pararegs, I just have them create the old kind of Word file, a doc file, not a docx file. And so they're not working with the kind of file that has a ribbon on it. And then I have developed a macro file here called convert parareg files doc.m, which then just automatically changes those files and adds the templates to it that put the buttons on. And so I'll open this file so you can see. You'll see it says convert indexes or convert scrolled, and I believe if you just convert scrolled, then it does the indexes as well. So there's probably no need for the first button there, but it's just a macro I've written to do that. And so that macro can be located anywhere. I just put it in a folder called developer files, that document. The way it works is Barry will send, or his secretary will send the files to me, Cheetah, and then I'll unzip those. They don't send them in zip form. I'll unzip them into the info directory, and the files I got from him are down here a ways, right here. See, they're all docs. Then I run that macro on them, and they become docx's. And that ensures that they have the right buttons applicable to them. Okay, I think I pretty much covered the ribbon system and how it interacts with the Visual Basic system. In the next lesson, I will talk about what I do the steps I go through to update the system based on new information. We're basically through the complicated stuff. Obviously, I haven't explained it all, but I've probably explained it enough that you can sort of run with it and try to understand what is there. There's a lot of Visual Basic code that we've talked about, but if you study it and work with it and refer back to this when you have some kind of problems, I think you probably can figure it out. And like I say, some of the very best, if you have a question, you can call me, of course, but if there's any if something's puzzling you, the best thing to do is just Google, right? Either look for Visual Basic help or just do a Google with a keyword or two, and you'll probably get your answer. Okay, I'm going to sign off for now.